So what does this all go back to? I think it goes back to the Exodus experience of the Hebrew people. It says God saw the suffering of his people. God saw that they were being oppressed by the Egyptians. They were in slavery and in bondage in Egypt. God saw their suffering, their oppression, but God did not just try to console them, tell them to make the best of it, put up with it, just suffer, as sometimes religion serves that purpose of trying to tell poor people, people who are being exploited, that is the will of God, and you just have to put up with it. Many women, for instance, have heard that from priests and ministers, that it's just the way it is, the male chauvinism, the male notion of superiority is just the way it is, and that's the will of God. You have to conform to that. Well, that is not the truth, and people who promote freedom, who promote liberation, certainly do not believe that God is the God of the oppressor. God is the God of the poor, but God who wants to change things. So God looked down, saw the suffering of God's people, but called Moses to lead the people out of slavery. And so that is the Exodus, which you find in the book of Exodus, the second book of the Old Testament. The Exodus. That's really the fundamental starting point for liberation theology. That God is the liberator. And that's how God revealed himself to his people. And this is what Father Eakuria had to say, the experience of political liberation. The people were living in slavery, they had no rights, they had no representation in the Egyptian empire, but God led them out through Moses, calling to Moses to bring them out of slavery and oppression so that they could be free and that they could form a society where they could have a decent life. This theme of freedom continued through the prophets, through the law, and the gospel. If you read the prophets, like any of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Hosea, you find that they were denouncing unjust judges, corrupt judges. They were very real, they were very down to earth, denouncing exploitative landlords, denouncing kings because of their corruption and oppression of the people. And you have the whole tradition of the prophets of the Old Testament. Some of them criticized a kind of religion which was just a religion between me and God, and that had nothing to do with the people. They were very critical of that kind of religion which pulled people away from their social responsibilities. The law, that is the law of the Old Testament, the Torah, is filled with social justice legislation, that you are not to oppress your workers. And the people are constantly reminded that, remember, you were slaves in Egypt, and now you are not to be oppressive. You are not to be slave masters, oppressing your own people. You are to respect the poor, you are to care for the poor, care for the workers. So it's really, this theme of liberation and social justice is really a constant throughout scripture. And of course, in the Gospels, we find perhaps the first indication of this is from the prayer of Mary. This is in the Gospel according to Luke, the Magnificat, where Mary bursts out in song and in praise of God because God has raised up the lowly and brought the powerful down from their thrones. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty-handed. This is Mary, the mother of Jesus, her way of praying, her way of celebrating who God is. And I think it's quite remarkable to see those sort of radical words in the prayer of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Praising God, thanking God for bringing the powerful down from their thrones, raising up the lowly, sending the hungry, sending the rich away empty-handed, and filling the hungry with good things. So Mary being with the poor, being of the poor, and thanking God for being also the liberator of the people. And we just go on and on through the Gospels that way. Jesus in his first sermon at Nazareth quoted from Isaiah, saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, freedom to captives." Again, the good news to the poor, freedom, these very important themes of Jesus, which ultimately got him into trouble. Jesus went on, you remember Zacchaeus, this rich man who had exploited the people. He was of short stature, so he went up a tree in order to be able to see Jesus passing by. But the Gospel, Luke, the author of the Gospel, says he was very rich. So he comes down. He says, "I will give half my belongings to the poor," says Zacchaeus. This is part of his conversion. In meeting Jesus, he says, "I will give half of my belongings to the poor, and if I have exploited people, if I have robbed people, as a tax collector," because he was a tax collector, I will give them restitution fourfold. I will give them fourfold what I have stolen from them. And so there again, you see the theme of social justice. The Good Samaritan parable. The Good Samaritan comes along. The priest and the Levite did not help the person who had been beaten up by robbers along the road. The Good Samaritan comes along, gets down from his horse, takes care of the man, takes him to an inn, puts him up there, and Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." I'll start to wind down a little bit. I want to give this quote from Ea Korea. Again, we're focusing pretty much on Ea Korea as the one who was the target of the assassination by the military. St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of my order, founder of the Jesuits, said, when we look at Christ crucified, we should ask ourselves, what have I done for Christ? What am I doing for Christ? What will I do? What should I do for Christ? But Father Ea Korea changed that a little bit, and I think very justly, very correctly. He said we should ask ourselves, what have I done for the crucified peoples of the world? What am I doing for the crucified peoples of the world? What should I be doing for the crucified people of the world? So expressing his belief, which is fundamental in Christianity, that Christ is present in people. Christ is present in the poor, in the hungry, the imprisoned, the sick, those without a home, those who are being oppressed. That's what he said in Matthew 25, the Last Judgment. When I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was homeless, you received me in your home. When I was in prison, you visited me. So Ea Korea is saying that if we love God, we love Christ, then we find Christ in people, especially in the poor and those who are in need. And many times it doesn't have to be people who are materially poor. It can be somebody who is lonely, somebody who needs an ear, someone to listen to them, somebody to accompany them, to cheer them up, to help them in some small way. But that is where we express our love of God, our love of Christ, in that person who is the face of Christ for us. So Ea Korea was saying, well, then if I look at the exploited peoples of the world and see the face of Christ in them, then we can ask, what have I done for the people? What am I doing now with my life? What will I be doing? What should I do? And this is something that could be of particular interest to you as students. How do you see yourself in the future? What are you really devoted to? What are you passionate about? What do you want to do with the talents that you all have, because you're here at this university? The education that you're receiving. And again, as Jesuits, we would say that we hope that students will become men and women for others, dedicated to the poor, to the sick, to all those people who are in need, those people who are left out of society. This doesn't mean that you don't look towards your own well-being, your own survival, but you don't make that the number one goal. I mean, we hope to be able to live a decent life, but it's all extremely important to ask what it's all about. What do I want to live for? And what would I be willing to die for if we're thinking of the martyrs of Latin America? So Ea Korea went on to answer the question, and what must we do for the crucified people of the world? Take them down from the cross. The cross is not a good thing. The cross was a bad thing for Jesus. He did not want it. He wanted to get out of it. But he would not get out of that predicament by keeping his mouth shut. That would have been a betrayal of his mission. But in the garden, you remember how he was fearful, and according to Luke, he was sweating drops of blood, and he said, "Father, if possible, let this chalice pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done." He remained faithful to his mission as a prophet, denouncing the scribes and Pharisees, denouncing the chief priests, calling them robbers, calling them hypocrites. He had to continue. He chose to continue to be that way. And that's why he was on the cross. That was the consequence of his prophetic mission. And so, but we would say, well, people who are being exploited, people who are being oppressed, we must stop that violence against them, because they should not be oppressed, they should not be mistreated that way. We must stop that violence, take them down from the cross. That cross obviously represents a peasant, poor farmer or farm worker, being crucified. Might say being crucified by the landlord, being crucified by the police. If he tries to organize a peasants' union, he could be killed, or he could be thrown in jail, or beaten up, or tortured. That's the way it is in Latin America, and the way it used to be here. Many union organizers in this country were treated with great violence by the police and by the private thugs of the owner. And this is an interesting statement. The church, as the continuation of the principal sacrament which Jesus Christ is, must realize, that is, karyonomic real, what it proclaims. It's very easy for the church to preach. All of us priests and sisters, yourselves, if you're maybe catechists or teachers of the faith, whatever, it's very easy just to deal with words. But those words need to be made reality in our lives and in the people that we're working with. Saint Francis of Assisi said, we must always evangelize. evangelize in the sense of proclaiming the gospel, bringing the good news of God's love. And he said, at times, when appropriate, through words. So we must always evangelize, always be bringing the good news to people. People are sad, people are oppressed, people are insecure about themselves and their future. God's love is brought to them, but not always in words. So we must always be doing that, and at times in words. But we have to do more than just talk. You know, talk is cheap. And so Ea Korea believed that we must make real what the church proclaims. That is, if we're proclaiming God's love for people, Jesus' love for people, we have to incarnate that. We have to be loving and caring and in very real ways for people who are suffering.